take to make up a pack. I suppose the reason I'm mentioning this is that it's almost daily news now, isn't it? A version of this. And the volume has gone up. Donald Trump was hot on it today again, a version of it, at the Republican convention and elsewhere, for foreign nationals living outside the Middle East but with links to radical Islam to be simply deported. And Trump says stop Muslims coming in from countries with a strong association with terrorism.
Well, how do you determine someone's strong association?
That's what I was going to ask you.
Well, I just think it's very simplistic thinking, like getting rid of all the foreigners with links to radical Islam. How do you define radical Islam, and how do you determine someone's got links to it? And at what point do you draw the line and say, it's too radical for us, you got to go? And what happens to their internal civil national rights? But the other question I wanted to ask is, ISIS seem to be operating unlike any other organized guerrilla warfare organization like Hamas or Hezbollah or anybody else for that matter. And I don't know if there's a centralized aspect to them where the chain of command is, from up there and it comes down and then they carry out these missions or these attacks. I think it's just anyone out there can go and do something violent and crazy and say, I'm ISIS. But what are they? And what does it mean? And how is it organized? And where does that chain of command go back to? And so the other thing is, these people all somehow have these mental health issues, have been, not exactly the most stable type personalities. And so what does that mean about how terrorism is carried out these days? And is it with a determined political objective, or is it just these random acts of violence that you would associate to a mentally unstable person? So
all that sounds very logical. Nevertheless, conservatives are increasingly wanting this in France and Australia, in the US. That's the conversation. That's the growing conversation, isn't it?
I just don't know if you can regulate the way they're proposing to and spot and identify these people and then do something about them. I just don't know if it's actually practical.
Before I get Dwayne's opinion, I heard political scientist Paul Buchanan the other day saying that when ISIS is destroyed, eventually these acts will grow fewer. Do you reckon that's right, or has the ISIS spirit somehow gone abroad like a genie out of a bottle, and it's the siren call for these people that you're describing with the mental issues? I wonder
if you could compare ISIS being destroyed to the war on terror, which is, it's quite open-ended. How do you identify ISIS? Where is their stronghold? Do they have, headquarters somewhere with a flag that says ISIS? So what does that mean?
ISIS comms.
And when you are destroying them, in the process of destroying them, are you creating collateral damage that is then going to create more ISIS supporters?
Yeah, all those things. Dwayne, do you have an opinion?
I think the way that Trump is talking is going to make things worse. You try and put a big hammer or a big boot on it, it's going to make it worse. This talk of the swift eradication and dealing with it quickly, it does really concern me. There is a book called The Starfish and the Spider. It's an analogy between the decentralized and the decentralized network you're referring to there. The starfish, certain breeds, supposedly, if you cut a tentacle off, it grows into two starfish, whereas a spider, take me to the headquarters, take out the head and you're taking out all the tentacles. And what you've got is a starfish which is decentralized, and naturally ISIS is a decentralized network. You put a big hammer on that, I think you're going to make it worse, and it really does concern me.
Almost time to go. Jim, we used to spend ages writing letters in the old days, and that is a very good point from Janet of Lower Hutt, that a lot of time was occupied in writing letters, which we no longer do. And Damon Salesa on the panel actually was talking about the decline of handwriting anyway. So people are no longer capable of writing those letters.
Well, it makes sense. Only 10 years ago, I couldn't write exam papers. My hands would get sore, and that was 10 years ago.
And that must be becoming endemic.
It must be.
Okay. Dwayne, lovely to have you on. Thank you for coming back on the panel, and come back again.
Enjoy that. Thank you so much.
Dwayne Major and Golnaz Bassam Tabar. Always nice to see you as well.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely weekend. And Checkpoint follows with Sharon Brett Kelly today.
Kia Kia ora everyone, haere mai, welcome to Checkpoint. Ko Sharon Brett Kelly, aho. Tonight, Donald Trump formally accepts the Republican nomination for the US presidency, delivering the longest acceptance speech in American history. Why the convicted murderer and sex offender Philip John Smith could be eligible for $50,000 compensation. Helen Clark is in sixth place for the top UN job. Does she still have a chance? A man who spends 4 hours in his car every day driving to and from Auckland just so he can own his own home. Asian families with young children have been found to be at risk of exploitation and are more likely to feel unease at expressing their identities. We'll look at the report. An Auckland brewery says sorry for using Māori names and imagery on its beer. How a $71 raffle ticket could win you a slice of a tropical island. And we'll preview the Super Rugby quarterfinals. But first, here's Katrina Batten with the news.
Kia ora, good evening. Republican Party presidential candidate Donald Trump has told his party's convention in Cleveland that he will not sign the TPP trade agreement if he becomes president. In a raucous and strident acceptance speech, Mr. Trump told delegates that the United States has in the past signed bad trade agreements which have damaged the country. He said the TPPA has the support of Hillary Clinton, but he won't sign it.
She supported the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which will not only destroy our manufacturing, but it will make America subject to the rulings of foreign governments, and it's not going to happen.
Mr. Trump says as president he will negotiate trade deals on a one-on-one basis with individual countries. He accused Democratic rival Hillary Clinton of a legacy of death, destruction, terrorism and weakness as US Secretary of State and declared himself a friend of the working class. The convicted murderer and sex offender Philip John Smith has apologised for his escape after being found guilty on charges of fleeing the country. Smith went to South America while on temporary release from prison in 2014 and was recaptured in Brazil. He had been serving a life sentence for murdering the father of a boy he'd been sexually abusing. Tom Furley reports.
Smith's case was heard in a non-contested hearing at the Auckland District Court today after a lengthy and complex legal process. The jury convicted him on escaping custody and passport charges, and he's been sentenced to 33 months in jail, which will be served concurrently with his life sentence. Through his lawyer, Tony Ellis, Smith said he regrets the impact his escape has had on others and apologised to other prisoners and his past victims. He believes he can be released safely back into the community in time. This is Tom Furley.
The Foreign Minister, Murray McCully, says it's not helpful to jump to conclusions about Helen Clark finishing in the middle of the pack in an informal poll on the next United Nations Secretary-General. The 15 members of the UN Security Council have voted on whether to encourage, discourage or have no opinion on each of the 12 declared candidates. Murray McCully says he spoke to officials in Helen Clark's campaign team in New York today.
It's all guns blazing. We're keen to do everything we can to try and get her across the line, but this is a process that will come to a conclusion in October, and we need to remember that. They're obviously very tense. It's a pretty challenging sort of process. Our people are working very hard, and they're going to stay working hard.
Murray McCully says there's a lot of tactical voting in the first round, and he expects things will change as time goes on. There are likely to be several more secret polls before an official ballot takes place. The lawyer for a man found guilty in New Zealand's first drone prosecution says his client's discharge without conviction was an enlightened decision. Simon Reeve, who's 38, was last month found guilty of 3 charges laid by the Civil Aviation Authority. Today, Justice Gary McCaskill discharged Mr Reeve without conviction as long as he pays $1,000 to a charity of his choice. Mr Reeve's lawyer, Rupert Glover, says publicity around the case will help others avoid the mistakes Mr Reeve made.
It's given him what he describes as 18 months of sheer hell, and his mother just said the same to me. They've gone through hell. They're a Christian law-abiding family who've never done anything deliberately to upset anybody or to infringe the rules of society, let alone the law of the land, and they've gone through agonies about this, and I'm just extremely relieved for them that it's turned out in an enlightened way.
Rupert Glover says the rules around drones are quite confusing. The police are investigating the withdrawal of money from the bank account of murdered Christchurch woman Renee Duckmanton after her death. Miss Duckmanton's burned body was found dumped on the verge of Main Rakai Road in mid-May. The 22-year-old sex worker was last seen a day earlier near the Peterborough and Manchester Streets intersection in Christchurch's red light district. Saini Morong, a 32-year-old butcher from the Christchurch suburb of Ilam, has been charged with her murder. To sport, the Highlanders Super Rugby title defence is on the line tonight against the Brumbies in the first Super Rugby quarter-final in Canberra. The reigning champs are clear favourites to advance to the Final Four. The Brumbies finished top of what's considered a weak Australian conference and 7th overall, 9 points behind the Highlanders, who finished third. However, the Highlanders hooker Ash Dixon isn't discounting the Brumbies, especially at home.
I've got a lot of threats in that side that you've got to take care of. I still think if we brought our B game, we didn't play to our potential, we'll get beaten easily. So we've got to play as well as we have been playing. And if we don't play to that, I guess potential, we will get beaten. So I think this Brumbies team is pretty dangerous.
The game kicks off at 8 o'clock. The new Manchester United boss Jose Mourinho has voiced his backing for Sunderland's Sam Allardyce as the new England manager, despite previously criticising the way his team played. Allardyce looks set to succeed Roy Hodgson, who resigned following England's disappointing showing at Euro 2016. Mourinho believes Allardyce is a wise choice.
I think he's more than ready. I think he's a good motivator. I think he can create a good team spirit with his players.
Manchester United manager Jose Mourinho. American basketball's NBA has cancelled plans to hold its 2017 All-Star Game in Charlotte, North Carolina, over a state law decried as discriminatory against the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our Sonic Tonic after 7 is all about the truth. Apparently, it's out there. In the 8 to 9 hour, a man described as the world's best-known professional conspiracy theorist.
They have created a network of bloodlines, what I would call software information fields, to represent the interests of that force within this matrix.
You decide when we talk with David Icke. With me, Paul Brennan, in for Brian Crump on Nights after 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, and there are warnings in force for severe gales and heavy rain in many areas. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Rain spreading south today, possibly heavy, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. Waitomo, Taumaranui and Taranaki. Scattered rain, possibly heavy for a time overnight, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. Rain with heavy falls tomorrow night. Whanganui, Taihepe and Manawatu, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. High cloud, scattered rain tomorrow morning. Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa, also Nelson and Marlborough. Cloudy areas today, occasional rain tomorrow morning, returning tomorrow evening, possibly heavy. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, scattered rain tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain developing about Fiordland this evening and spreading north tomorrow with some heavy and possibly thundery falls. The Chatham Islands, cloud increasing tomorrow with gale northerlies and rain from afternoon. It's 5:08.
Kia ora, Katrina. Donald Trump has formally accepted the Republican nomination for the US presidency this afternoon, delivering the longest acceptance speech in American history, spelling out the country's troubles with crime, terrorism and immigration. Mr. Trump spoke for 1 hour and 15 minutes in a speech described by many as dark. He told an enthusiastic audience that law and order is the most pressing issue facing all Americans. And if elected, Americans will finally be safe in their homes. He vowed to stop gangs and violence and to be tough on immigration.
We must immediately suspend immigration from any nation that has been compromised by terrorism until such time as proven vetting mechanisms have been put in place. We don't want them in our country. I only want to admit individuals into our country who will support our values and love our people. Anyone who endorses violence, hatred, or oppression is not welcome in our country and never, ever will be. Decades of record immigration have produced lower wages and higher unemployment for our citizens, especially for African American and Latino workers. We are going to have an immigration system that works, but one that works for the American people. We are going to build a great border wall to stop illegal immigration, to stop the gangs and the violence, and to stop the drugs from pouring into our communities.
And after 6 tonight, we'll gauge reaction to Donald Trump's speech from a Mexican immigrant now working in Arizona. But our correspondent at the Republican convention is Simon Marks. I spoke to him just after Donald Trump finished speaking and asked him if his speech revealed anything new.
Well, it was a very long speech, and at times it was a very dark speech. I think there will be people out there who say it was too long and it should have been a little bit lighter in places. But Donald Trump had a job to do tonight, a couple of different ones, actually. First of all, he had to put this convention on a different plane. He needed to overcome the sense that we'd all had since Monday that the Republican Party and Donald Trump particularly were finding it difficult to get their message out because there were so many other issues that were overshadowing the convention. Melania Trump's plagiarism earlier in the week, Ted Cruz's refusal to endorse Donald Trump just about 24 hours ago. So what Donald Trump needed to do was to come in here and command the room. He did that with a speech that was markedly different from any kind of acceptance speech that we've heard in modern times from an American presidential candidate, but one that Donald Trump and Republicans here say is illustrative of the fact that he's a different kind of candidate. As he said in the speech, he's not interested in pursuing the same old policies that are advocated by the same old politicians. That's code for Hillary Clinton, who'll be holding her convention next week. He wanted to put a radically different set of policies on the agenda, and he did that. He focused very extensively and very angrily about the tide of violent crime that he says is being committed in the United States by illegal immigrants. He says that is going to end under a Trump presidency. He threatened, as he's done before on the campaign trail, to renegotiate trade agreements, all of the major trade agreements, NAFTA between the United States, Canada and Mexico, the US-South Korea trade agreement. He called the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership dead on arrival in a Trump presidency. It's not, he said, gonna happen. These were a radical series of policies that he put forward, but they didn't neatly fit any kind of political ideology, because equally in the speech he made a play for Bernie Sanders supporters to come on board with him, and he also praised Republicans in the hall for cheering when he advocated in favor of rights for the gay and lesbian community in the United States. So he doesn't particularly neatly fit core ideological Republican precepts, and he was making it very clear that under a Trump presidency here in the United States, things are going to be very, very different.
A big chunk of it was on immigration, wasn't it?
Yes, an enormous focus of the speech, and also that's where he sounded increasingly dark and increasingly angry, and there is no question that there will be people here in the United States who say that he sounded demagogic. I was getting texts from someone who has worked with both of the Clintons in the past and is still in contact with them as the speech was being made, and he was saying, I find this absolutely terrifying. I'm worrying that this is going to resonate with voters, and I'm also worried about how she, Hillary Clinton, is going to perform against him at the televised presidential debates, which will be taking place later in the year. I mean, that was really the section of the speech where he was throwing the reddest of red meat at all of the delegates here in the room, and also at the wider television audience. I mean, look, he is a populist, but he's also, particularly on that issue and on some of the other issues in the speech, an extremist, and he made it absolutely clear that he sees a very strong hand for the executive, the presidency in this country, if he walks into the Oval Office. And he promised to do things that he can't possibly really deliver on. He's going to make America rich again. He's going to end illegal immigration. I mean, these were all enormous promises, sweeping aims and ambitions. There was very little subtlety in the speech and very little detail about precisely how he would go about doing all of that.
And how would you sum up the whole week? I mean, has it been a bit of a flop?
Well, the first 3 days were a disaster. I mean, there's no question about that whatsoever, and Republicans were panicked by it. They will be hoping that most Americans only tuned into this convention for Donald Trump's speech tonight. They'll now be sending opinion pollsters out there, canvassing, trying to find out whether Donald Trump has managed to overcome the problems earlier in the week and secure any kind of a bounce in the polls. But look, he cannot leave Cleveland claiming to be leading a unified political party. The Republicans are completely fractured. There were the delegates in the hall who are still popping balloons and heading out of here slowly, but there were all the Republicans who didn't come to Cleveland. Republican leaders, the orthodox elites of the Republican Party, its famous stars, both Presidents George Bush, Mitt Romney, John McCain, a whole host of others weren't here. This is a completely new type of Republican Party that is being put on display to the American voters. Donald Trump can only gamble that it's going to prove attractive, but we'll get a sense of just how the public has responded in the course of the next few days. And remember, Hillary Clinton has the immediate right of reply, because on Monday here in the United States, we will all be in Philadelphia, and then it'll be her party that everybody here is covering.
And what are you expecting there? I mean, are you expecting the same drama?
Well, I think that we're expecting a convention that passes off a lot more smoothly, because Hillary Clinton will want to show that she has a unified Democratic Party behind her, even if there are still enormous frictions between Hillary Clinton and the supporters of Bernie Sanders. She and Bernie Sanders, of course, have now made peace. He has endorsed her, but he has also acknowledged that he can't force his supporters to line up behind her, and a number of them are likely to be protesting against Hillary Clinton at that convention. But unlike this convention, she will be flanked by Democratic Party royalty. Barack Obama, her husband Bill Clinton, enormously popular figures within the Democratic Party. That's a positive for her in the sense that it demonstrates to Democrats that their party is much more unified and behind her than this party is behind Donald Trump. But it's also a potential negative, because it allows Donald Trump to point at the tableau that will exist of Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. And as he did here tonight in the speech that he made on the final night of this convention, he will say, really, to the American voters in swing battleground states like this one, Ohio, really? You want more of these guys? That's the dynamic that is now created for the election campaign that we're going to be covering all the way through until November the 8th.
Simon Marks at the Republican convention in Cleveland, Ohio. The lawyer for convicted murderer and sex offender Philip John Smith believes his client could be eligible for up to $50,000 in compensation. Smith fled the country to South America while on temporary release in November 2014 and was captured in Brazil. He'd been serving a life sentence for murdering the father of a boy he had been sexually abusing. But in an unusual twist, Smith's lawyer Tony Ellis says the Brazilian judge who deported his client could be found incompetent, and Smith may be able to appeal his deportation. Our reporter Tom Furley was at the Auckland District Court today.
Philip John Smith was charged with escaping from custody and a passport offence, but the case had been going through a lengthy and complex legal process. His case has now been heard in a non-contested hearing at the Auckland District Court today, with the unusual move of Smith pleading not guilty but requesting the jury find him guilty. Shortly after the jury convicted him on the escaping and passport charges, Smith was sentenced to 33 months in jail, which will be served concurrently with his life sentence. In a statement read out by Smith's lawyer, Tony Ellis, outside court, Smith said his escape to Brazil was a huge mistake and he regretted the impact it had on others.
I apologise to the many prisoners who've been adversely affected by my escape. I also apologise to the victims of my previous offending for the distress that this may have caused.
Tony Ellis says Smith's existing life imprisonment sentence can't be added to, making today's ruling have no practical effect.
So the 33 months the judge has given him means he could be considered for parole after 11 months, but as the parole board has already said, we're not going to consider you until November next year. That's longer than 11 months, so it's not an effective sentence really, other than you can say it's on his record. And it might, I suppose, affect future parole board hearings.
Dr Ellis says the move to hold a non-contested hearing and plead not guilty allows Smith to retain his right to appeal the conviction, with further legal action being brought in Brazil. He says the Brazilian judge who deported him was an alcoholic suffering from dementia, and the local bar association was trying to have his sentences handed down over the last 5 years annulled.
Two things it could make. One, he might receive some compensation for illegally being detained in Brazil and for being deported, and then secondly, if he wanted to, if there's sufficient evidence comes forward, he could challenge these convictions in that he shouldn't have been prosecuted for an offence that he'd been illegally deported for.
Dr Ellis says Smith could be eligible for up to $50,000 compensation if it's found his deportation was illegal. A decision around whether two standing judicial reviews before the High Court should still proceed is yet to be made. The Department of Corrections declined to comment while further proceedings are underway. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko tomwhiri tēnei.
It's coming up to 22 minutes past 5. Coming up, an informal poll delivers a blow to Helen Clark's hopes of becoming the United Nations' next Secretary-General. And we meet a man who spends 4 hours in his car commuting to and from Auckland just so he can own his own home. We'd love to hear from you in any way you choose. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And don't forget, you can watch us online at rnz.co.nz/checkpoint or on Freeview Channel 15. Well, it seems the Old Boys Network has struck again, with 4 of the 5 top candidates in a poll to be picked as the United Nations' next Secretary-General being men. The informal poll has also delivered a blow to New Zealand's former Prime Minister Helen Clark, who reportedly finished in the middle of the pack. Here's our political reporter May Heron.
The outcome of the poll is supposed to be secret, with only each candidate being told their own score and none of the information made public. But within hours of the straw poll finishing, the results were leaked to the media and posted all over social media. The 15 members of the UN Security Council have voted on whether to encourage, discourage or have no opinion on each of the 12 declared candidates. Our correspondent in New York, Lorna Shattuck, says it's reported Helen Clark came in 6th place.
Helen Clark received 8 encourage votes, but 5 discourage and 2 no opinions. And I think it's those discourage ones which are particularly significant because, of course, 5 of the members of the Security Council do have vetoes, and that would indicate that later on some of them might vote to veto her if she continues her candidacy.
However, that's very much speculation, as it's not clear who those 5 discouraged votes came from. Even though there's a strong push for a woman to be the next Secretary-General, the former UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Antonio Guterres, came out on top. Jana von Stein is a senior lecturer of political science and international relations at Victoria University.
Half of the contenders are women, which is great, but if you look at who it was that was most strongly encouraged to continue, 4 out of the 5 top people were men. So to me, that suggests that the Old Boys Network that everybody kind of talks about is still alive and well.
She says it does not look good for Helen Clark, but the Foreign Minister, Murray McCully, disagrees. He says there's a lot of tactical voting in the first round, and he expects things will change as time goes on.
I think it's clear that there's been a significant campaign underway to try and protect the position of the European, particularly the Eastern European candidates. And it was always expected that would play a significant part in the first round at least. Now that's out of the way, it'll be interesting to see what sort of pattern people settle into.
He says he spoke to officials in Helen Clark's campaign team in New York today, and they will now be trying to talk to those that may have placed the discouraged vote.
It's all guns blazing. We're keen to do everything we can to try and get her across the line, but this is a process that'll come to a conclusion in October, and we need to remember that. They're obviously very tense. It's a pretty challenging sort of process. Our people are working very hard, and they're going to stay working hard.
Labour's foreign spokesperson David Shearer says the poll result in no way rules Helen Clark out.
It is incredibly difficult to know where it's going to go, and it's a little bit like selecting the Pope. You really don't know until the white smoke starts to appear.
There are likely to be several more secret polls before an official ballot takes place. No one gets officially dropped, but it's up to each candidate to take themselves out of the running. Once the Security Council's candidate is picked, it will go to the General Assembly for a final vote. It's hoped that result will be known by October. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
An Australian couple has come up with a novel idea of selling their tropical Micronesian island resort by holding a raffle. Doug and Sally Beats have sold almost 44,000 tickets at 71 New Zealand dollars each to people from 100 countries around the world. The winner will own the Koshrai Nautilus Resort, including its restaurant, hotel rooms and scuba diving business. I spoke to owner Doug Beats earlier today and asked him if he was surprised about the number of tickets sold, with just 5 days to go until the raffle is drawn.
We always hoped we'd get this close. We've been running it for about 12 weeks now. We've got about 4 days to go. And this was sort of our goal, to hit around the 50,000 ticket market. And it's amazed us how many different countries have got involved here. But I guess we're really happy that this many people have joined in.
Why did you decide to do this? Why did you decide to raffle it?
Well, because of where we're located, we're probably 1,000 kilometres from the closest real estate agent, so we were always going to have to do it online. And we announced it to our adult children that we wanted to move back to Australia, be close to our elderly parents and our new granddaughter. And then our oldest son turned up on the island a couple of weeks later with this grandiose plan to raffle the place off. We'd done a lot of research, and after we really looked into it, we thought this is an exciting, unusual thing to do. Put the place into the hands of the average everyday person instead of someone who's wealthy.
And you're going to draw it on Tuesday. How are you actually going to draw it?
There's a website called random.org. We're going to go on there. We've already practiced it many times. And you put in the first ticket number, which is number 1, and the last ticket number, and push the button, and that website randomly draws the lucky winner for you.
So I calculate you get about, if it's 44,000 at say 71 New Zealand dollars each for each raffle ticket, I calculate you get around about $3 million for this. Is that round about what you think?
In New Zealand dollars, yeah, it probably would be.
So what does the winner get for $3 million?
Okay, well, for $71 buying a ticket, we've got about 2.5, 3 acres sitting on the beachfront facing east. Watch the sun come up over the Pacific Ocean each morning. We've got 18 hotel rooms, 70-seat restaurant, air-conditioned or sit out by the swimming pool. We've got a scuba dive operation, 2 dive boats. We've got about 8 rental cars. Yeah, and it's, there's a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom residence for the manager / owner. And
you've spent about 20 years developing it. So tell us about Koshrai. It's pretty remote. How do you get there?
Okay, so from Brisbane, there's flights heading up that way. So from New Zealand, I guess you'd either get to Brisbane and then, sort of take a flight, stop on a couple of islands. You're on a 737. Or you would go via Fiji. There's a flight from Fiji as well heading up there. And and you're on a big plane and it's a former US trust territory. So the United States, luckily for us, have treated the airport like a US airport. And a few years ago, they did a major resurface of the runway. They've got big American fire trucks and all that stuff on a little tiny remote island.
And how did you find the place? I mean, how did you end up having this resort?
Well, I was sort of in, late 20s, getting a bit disenchanted with life, and saw a documentary on TV one night and about Micronesia. A couple of weeks later, picked up a business magazine when we were waiting in the doctor's surgery, and there was an article about Micronesia and the business opportunities up there, and it just went home that night, started talking about it, literally could not sleep. Went back to the doctor's surgery the next morning, asked them to photocopy the article, rang the magazine. 3 days later, I was at the guy's house who wrote the article, and it just went from there. I was too young and naive to realise how big and bold of a project it was, and just off we went and built a hotel up there and a restaurant and a dive operation.
And how do you feel about selling it, or how do you feel about leaving it now?
It's a real emotional one, but we just think there's a new phase in our life ready to start back in here in Australia with our children. Our granddaughter, she was there from when she was 1 to 2 years old, and for a grandparent to sort of see their grandchild every day, take her to the vegetable garden, feed her cherry tomatoes, and, just then when, our son and daughter-in-law and her moved back to Australia, it was just a part of her came with us, and we just, we've been back in Australia actually the last 10 days here promoting the raffle just before it ends, and it's just great sort of being with family. My parents are in their 80s, Sally's are in their 70s, and it's just time for us to be back here now.
And that's Island Resort owner Doug Beats. Coming up, a new study by the Families Commission reveals Asian families with young children have been found to be at risk of exploitation. And an Auckland brewery apologises for using Māori names and imagery on its range of beers. But first, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The Republican Party presidential candidate Donald Trump has told his party's convention in Cleveland that he will not sign the TPP trade agreement if he becomes president. In a raucous and strident acceptance speech, Mr. Trump told delegates that the United States had in the past signed bad trade agreements that had damaged the country. He said the TPPA had the support of Hillary Clinton, but he would not sign it. The murderer and child sex offender Philip John Smith has apologised for his escape after being found guilty on charges of fleeing the country. Smith went to South America while on temporary release from prison in 2014 and was recaptured in Brazil. The Foreign Minister, Murray McCully, says it's not helpful to jump to conclusions about Helen Clark finishing in the middle of the pack in an informal poll on the next United Nations Secretary-General. The 15 members of the UN Security Council have voted on whether to encourage, discourage or have no opinion on each of the 12 declared candidates. The lawyer for a man found guilty in New Zealand's first drone prosecution says his client's discharge without conviction was an enlightened decision. Simon Reeve, who's 38, was last month found guilty of 3 charges laid by the Civil Aviation Authority. An Auckland brewery has apologised for using Māori names and imagery on its range of beers. Birkenhead Brewing Company named beers after Te Arawa ancestors Tutanekai and Hinimoa from Rotorua on 2 of their labels. Sky Television is considering taking legal action against a group that illegally streamed a boxing match. The company says it caught more than 10 people illegally live streaming the fight between Joseph Parker and Australian Solomon Haumono last night. And 2 people have been flown by helicopter to Christchurch Hospital after their car left the road in Lewis Pass this afternoon. The road remains open. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather.
Thank you, Katrina. Turning to business now with Nona Peltier. Hello, Nona. The telecommunications company Chorus going to hire another 250 technicians. Why?
Well, there you go. 250, and they already are putting on 25 technicians on every single week. But it's not enough. They're falling behind in all sorts of areas, not just in the rollout of the fibre, which is in strong demand, but with faults. They've got a lot of faults and they can't get them fixed under their benchmark 48 hours. So they try to get their faults fixed within 48 hours on average. It's been 60 hours, so It's taking a longer time. They've got a lot of faults that are open. They just can't quite get on top of them. They say it's not because our network isn't in good nick. It is. It's in good shape. They just don't have enough staff. So they're looking for 250 in addition to the 25 they're putting on every week.
And are they saying where these 250 are coming from? They're going to have to go overseas to find them?
Well, when I asked, he said it was a good question. They didn't quite know either. But they have been looking all over the place. And they're looking within New Zealand, on the islands, wherever, any place. I think they really need a lot of staff. And of course, if they can get trained staff, all the better. But of course, we're seeing that across a lot of different industries. Anything to do with construction, for sure.
Fuel retailers ramping up their loyalty programs. What's that about?
Yeah, there you go. There's another one. That's a technology innovation play, really. So Z Energy came out this week and said that they are going to be cutting their agreement with Progressive Enterprises, which is the Countdown supermarkets. And, you know, you get those dockets and they say, oh, fuel discount, what have you. Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of people can't be bothered to redeem those, in fact. And so Z Energy used to accept those and will still accept them until the end of the month. But they actually own 0.25% of Flybuys. So who knew that? I didn't realize that. But anyway, they own 25% of Flybuys. And because of technology and the developments with the, you know, mobile apps and all that kind of thing, they can gather a lot more information now about their customers using Flybuys. And so they can now offer them a loyalty discount, a fuel discount, other kinds of discounts using those Flybuy cards as well as points. So they're going to cut the paper because a lot of people don't like to use that, and go just with the Flybuys. They got 2.5 million customers on Flybuys, so that's quite a few. Now, interestingly, BP, they've launched an app. So that also came out, I think, yesterday, as a matter of fact. And that app allows you to sit in your car, pay from your car. You don't have to get out of your car. And it also keeps track of your fuel bills and all sorts of other, how long your trips were between pumping up at the station. And both companies say, watch this space because in the next few months they're going to have a lot more to offer their loyal customers. So if you aren't a Flybuys customer, if you don't save your dockets, you might be out of luck when it comes to getting a fuel discount.
Right, so the competition's ramping up. So how did the markets end the week?
Oh, well, interestingly, the New Zealand market is stronger than all the rest in the region. There was some disappointing results out of the US, and that kind of put a damper on things. Asia's opened up weaker, but New Zealand has been defying the market. Go figure. We're still in that record-breaking streak. We're outperforming the rest. We had a rise just over 2%, and that just came back a little bit at the end. It was quite strong all afternoon, but still finished 12 points up. Again, another record, 7,226 on the currency market. Again, the New Zealand dollar is very strong and steady at levels right now, and it has a better, firmer tone to it, even after being beaten up a little bit earlier in the week over that inflation data and the Reserve Bank forecast on the economy quite damped down the currency. We finished today at 70.1 US cents, 93.7 Australian, and 52.53 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Asian families with young children have been found to be at risk of exploitation and are more likely to feel unease at expressing their identities. A new study by the Families Commission, which operates under the name Superu, today released its fourth Families and Whānau Status Report. Kate Gudsell reports.
The study focused on how families from different ethnicities were faring, as well as looking at different generations of families. It found Asian families with younger children appear to be more vulnerable in terms of money, housing and hours of work and pay. Xiao Yingfu moved to New Zealand 20 years ago from China. She's a business consultant in Auckland, is married to a Chinese man and has 2 sons. Dr. Fu says she's not surprised by the findings. She doesn't know anyone in her Chinese community who would be on welfare and says people will take what jobs they can.
They try to find a job. And quite often, whatever the job is available, they will take the job. And in my view, most likely that is lower paid than their qualifications. With the children and with the 2 incomes, and quite often, they are very hardworking people, working long hours. And, so with the financial and the housing stress and pressure, I wouldn't be surprised.
The study also found Asian families are more likely to feel uneasy about expressing their identities. It says those families face risks including alienation, isolation and exploitation. Dr. Fu says many of the Asian people the study looked at could be like her and not have any other family in New Zealand. She says she has no problem expressing her Chinese identity, but it's probably different for her 18 and 12-year-old sons and newer migrants.
I've been here for nearly 20 years, and in my heart I felt I'm New Zealander, right? But based on my face, people always say, you're Chinese. So that is why I even didn't bother to give myself an English name. So some people probably try to mingle with the mainstream, and probably sometimes it's really confused on who I am, what the culture should I take.
A principal advisor at Suparu, Bev Hong, says feeling unease at expressing your identity could have repercussions in the future.
It sort of starts to, I suppose, ring bells in terms of future implications, in terms both of that family function of instilling a sense of belonging in your children and in society more generally, and also just, in the future as we go forward.
Did that surprise you?
As a Chinese person, no, it didn't.
Suparu's Director of Research, Vasantha Krishnan, says the study reflects the large amount of variation in the Pan-Asian group. Within it, there'll be different source countries, different generations, people who have different migrant status and different language abilities. She says it shows it's not a single profile or story for Asian people, and this country is becoming more diverse.
I think New Zealand is a society that is accepting of Asian communities. Obviously, many of these communities are new, and the profile of New Zealand is changing rapidly. We are becoming one of the most super diverse countries there is in the world, and so we've got a lot of opportunities to both learn, adapt and grow.
The report says on the whole, Māori families are faring relatively well, but are more likely to live in deprived areas and have housing problems. Young Pacific families fare less well, but have strong relationships and community connections. European families with young children are generally faring well. For Checkpoint, ko Kate Gudsall tēnei.
When Dr. Don Brash was in the studio discussing the housing crisis earlier this week, he told us about a builder/handyman who'd been working on his building, who commutes to Auckland from Maungaturoto. That's in Northland, into Auckland and back home from Auckland every working day. The reason? He could afford to buy a house in Northland. So he drives well over 200 kilometres a day, which might be fine if it's a clear run, but as anyone knows, who knows the Northern Motorway will tell you, once you hit Albany, it can be a crawl. John Campbell went to see Kieran Charles at one of his Auckland work sites and asked how long it takes.
This morning it took me about an hour and 40 minutes.
Which is a good run, I guess, because of the school holidays, right?
It's so much quicker because there's no children and no mums taking children to school. No traffic at all, straight run through, hour and 40 minutes. And it can, if there's traffic, especially when school's on or if it's raining, it can take me over 2 hours, sometimes 2.5 hours.
And that's just one way. You've got to get home in the evenings.
I've got to get home in the evenings, and on a Friday, if you leave at the wrong time, trying to get out of Auckland on a Friday, then that can take me 2.5 hours to get home. And coming in on a Monday, I'll leave home at 5:30 in the morning, and I'll still get in about 8 o'clock because everybody coming back into Auckland on a Monday morning.
So you leave home at 5:30 in the morning. What time do you get home on those days?
On a normal day, I'll work until around 7 o'clock and get home about 8:30 on a normal day.
Wow, that's a long day.
It is a long day.
But what's the quid pro quo for that? What do you have when you get home? You own your own home, right? Which is a fantastic thing. And what did you pay for it?
We've got a 5.5, nearly 6 acre farm with a big 3-bedroom house and a double garage. We've got a log shed, shearing shed. We've got everything with animals, and we paid $325,000.
Which is actually in the realm of a deposit in Auckland, isn't it? On a small place.
It is. We was looking for property in Auckland before I moved, and you're looking at some of the deposits I was asking was more than what we paid for our house up in Auckland.
So that's wonderful. I mean, getting home on Friday night when you've got the whole weekend free must be the most fantastic freedom. It's your place, you own it, but equally you spend, what 3 to 4 hours a day in the car, so that's 20 hours a week. And what's your petrol bill per week?
I've got a really economical van, and minimum I put $40 a day in, just coming backwards and forwards. If I've got to go and do running around, it can cost me $50 a day, and that's without running costs for the van. My van has to have a service every 10,000 Ks, which only takes me between 2 and 2.5 months, which costs me $300 a time. And then you've got your running costs in your tyres and everything else to add on to that as well before I can even make any money.
Kieran, you're English obviously, and my sense is that when you moved to New Zealand you were hoping for a better lifestyle, an easier lifestyle. Are you surprised by how hard it is?
The house pricing is really expensive in Auckland. The way of life is really nice, and I'd rather be here and pay a bit more if I had to than rather live in London or live in the UK. It's a nicer environment, nice people, the scenery is fantastic, and there's a lot of work, and I love it.
So all the driving, somewhere in the region of 2 hours each way, each day, hundreds of dollars a week in petrol, all the time sitting in the car, the days that start at 5:30 in the morning and end with you getting back home at 8:30 at night, it's all worth it to be here.
Most definitely worth it to be here. I wouldn't want anything else. And it's just great, it's fantastic.
And that's commuter Kieran Charles talking to John Campbell. If you spend more than 4 hours in your car getting to work every day, we'd love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us at Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And now it's coming up to, it's 13 minutes to 6 actually. After Friday night's failed army coup, Turkey's president has declared a state of emergency for 3 months. This will allow President Erdogan and his cabinet to bypass parliament when drafting new laws and to restrict or suspend rights and freedoms. Since the coup, schools have been closed and thousands of civil servants have been arrested or sacked. Teachers, judges, soldiers, education ministry officials, university heads, clerics and others. I spoke to Andrew Gardner, an Amnesty International researcher in Istanbul, and asked him what conditions were like for those being held in detention.
One of the problems is that people can't get into the detention facilities. People can't even let their family members know that they are there. But the information that has got out, and there's been images and photos as well shared, are showing a picture which is pretty appalling. I mean, people being held in sports centres, people being held in barns. Soldiers stripped to their underwear, they're handcuffed behind their backs, and of course these persistent allegations of widespread ill treatment, including beatings and even worse in places of detention. So, all the reports we're getting paint a pretty appalling picture of detention conditions. People haven't been given access to their family members to let them know where they are. They haven't been able to access lawyers whilst in detention. So these are really serious abuses. Abuses no matter whether it's now a state of emergency or under normal conditions. These things are never acceptable.
Do you think President Erdogan and the government is actually listening to the international community on this?
I think there's a danger, not just that President Erdogan and the government aren't listening to the international community, but they're not listening to the entirety of the Turkish people. They're just listening to an angry base in Turkey. So certainly in his speeches, President Erdogan has criticised the European Union, has criticised foreign governments for their critiquing of Turkey. But certainly it's not just about not listening to international voices, but it seems to be not listening to voices at home in Turkey either.
And you're in Istanbul. What's it like? I mean, out on the street, are people afraid to speak out, or is there real tension?
I mean, there's a huge amount of fear. There's a huge amount of fear about criticising the government in any way, because that would lead to you being labelled a sympathiser of the coup, or maybe allied to the coup plotters in some way. In the daytime, the streets are slowly returning to normal. You're seeing less and less shops and business being closed. More and more they're opening up. Normal city life is yet to resume. Just last Friday and Saturday, we had the spectre of fighter jets flying low over the city. We had gun battles between planes and helicopters. We had bombings of the parliament building in Ankara, soldiers firing into crowds of people. It's too early for this to return to normal. By night, the situation is very different. Large crowds of anti-coup protesters occupying squares, holding Turkish flags, shouting nationalist slogans, shouting support for President Erdogan, and a small minority of these people have unfortunately engaged in attacks on people who are seen as critics of the government. There is a risk of a long-term unstable situation. A 3-month state of emergency has been declared. It's not clear how the state authorities are going to implement this, what all the restrictions are going to be. But there's certainly a lot of potential for long-term instability, a quite repressive approach to be taken by the authorities. We're already seeing indications that the government purge that at first largely targeted state institutions, ministries, is spreading to civil society. We've seen attacks on the media in terms of journalist press cards being revoked, licenses for media houses being withdrawn, websites blocked. This morning there is news that a police operation is being conducted against lawyers in the western city of Izmir. So really the news we're receiving day by day is not in a good direction.
That's Amnesty International's Andrew Gardner in Istanbul. Now, tonight marks the start of the business end of the Super Rugby season. The Brumbies are hosting the Highlanders in Canberra tonight, while tomorrow the Hurricanes, who came from nowhere to top the New Zealand Conference, host the Sharks in Wellington. The Hurricanes coach, Chris Boyd, spoke to our rugby reporter Joe Porter about the way the team is approaching the match.
Well, Chris, of course, the million-dollar question, Julian Savea has been dropped to the bench for this weekend. What's the reasoning behind that selection decision?
I think the team's been selected on form, and Jason Woodward, I thought, played well on the weekend against the Crusaders. Deserved a crack, and I wanted to bring Matt Proctor back, and so Julian made way.
And I guess Julian's performance last week was a little bit lacklustre. Jason's, on the other hand, was very good, so that really has forced this change.
Yeah, it has. I mean, it's a pure form, very current form. We know Julian's upside, and we're hoping that he'll find that form when he comes into the game after half-time.
So you're expecting him to make quite an impact off the bench then? He'll be pretty fired up.
Yeah, I'd hope so. He was not, he wasn't terribly happy about the news, and I can understand that. I mean, he's been a great player for the All Blacks and for the Hurricanes, and he will be in the future. But just right now for this game, we thought that the other guys deserved selection.
Absolutely. And the Sharks, they're of course a very well-travelled side. They don't mind coming to New Zealand, and they've got a great recent record against the Hurricanes, including that loss you guys had back in May. So they're certainly not a team to take lightly.
No, it sticks in the claw a little bit for us. In fact, the last game we lost was against them in Durban, where we let ourselves down badly, and boys are furious about that, really.
And that game was really a catalyst for this amazing run you've had towards this finals. That loss has spurred 5 unbeaten games into the top of the standing, so it really was a turning point.
Yeah, it has been, and we thought when we looked at the draw at the start, if we had too much to do at the end, we might struggle, but, we're very pleased to, with our form over the last 3 or 4 weeks.
And the Sharks on Saturday night, what are you expecting them to bring to the game?
Whole lot of physicality, good set piece, scrum and line out, and pretty brutal at the breakdown. So I think that physical battle is going to underpin the decision.
And you guys got a bit of a dust up in Durban. What do you need to improve on to win this quarter-final?
I think we probably snoozed a little bit there. That, not taking away any from them. They got, they had some good tries and played well and stuff. But we made 29 handling errors and dropped off to a number of tackles and stuff. It was a pretty horrible performance. So we are hoping that they're not going to force to repeat that.
Coach Chris Boyd, thank you very much for joining me, and all the best for Saturday night.
Thank you very much.
Chris Boyd there speaking with Joe Porter. Well, to talk more about the Super Rugby quarter-finals, I'm joined by our sports reporter in Auckland, Matt Chatterton. Matt, tonight the Brumbies play host to the Highlanders. Can the New Zealanders take the win?
Great question. Yes, I believe they can. The Highlanders last year went on a very similar path to the finals, where they beat the Hurricanes in the final. They played over in South Africa, then came and played in the Waratahs in Australia, and then played the Hurricanes in the final. So they are used to travelling in these circumstances, and the Brumbies are the best Australian team, and that unfortunately isn't saying much this season. There were really only 2 teams in the Australian Conference, the Brumbies and the Waratahs, that were really competitive. The other 3 were pretty lacklustre, unfortunately. And the Highlanders, are quite competent at winning on the road, and I believe that they will probably take it out tonight. That game is at 8 o'clock New Zealand time, and we'll have updates on that on our website. So.
Meanwhile, South Africa hosts 2 matches on Sunday morning, New Zealand time. The Lions host the Crusaders in Johannesburg, and the Stormers play the Chiefs. Yeah, so the way the conference system worked, Hurricanes came out on top, so obviously they get to host a home quarter-final, and Highlanders have gone to Australia, and unfortunately for the Crusaders and the Chiefs, they finished lower on the table, so they have to go over to South Africa to play the 2 best South African teams. The Crusaders versus the Lions, it'll be an interesting match. I think the Crusaders beat the Lions in the regular season 43-37 in Johannesburg. Whether they can do that again will be another question. The Lions were the best team in South Africa this year. They had a poor performance last week against the Jaguars in Argentina, but that was because they rested the majority of their team for that match, and they'll have a full-strength team back for this week. So they have, refreshed players. So that will be quite a tough task on the Crusaders. The Chiefs versus Stormers. The Stormers, who are based in Cape Town, haven't actually played a New Zealand team this year, so it will be interesting to see, I guess, how they handle the fast pace that we tend to play at. I'm confident in saying that I guess at least one of those teams will come back victorious from South Africa. So, what are the chances of 2 all-New Zealand semi-finals next week?
I kind of answered that question a little bit already, didn't I? Yes, there is a good chance. I think if there's any team not to make it, it could quite possibly be the Crusaders. They unfortunately weren't able to get over to Johannesburg until Wednesday, so a bit of a delayed trip over there. Haven't had much time to prepare and the altitude over there, but it could happen. I have a feeling that the Hurricanes should beat the Sharks tomorrow night. The Highlanders, while they may not be favourites in Australia, they probably are favourites here to beat the Brumbies. And the Chiefs should beat the Stormers, I have a feeling. So at least I reckon 3 out of the 4 teams will be there. That will be New Zealanders. Right, and switching sports, just briefly, a bit of controversy in the boxing ring last night. Tell us about it. What's happened? Yeah, so Joseph Parker, the New Zealand heavyweight boxer, was fighting in Christchurch against former NRL player Solomon Hamono. Parker knocked Hamono to the deck in about the 4th round. He caught him with an uppercut, which sent him to the deck, and then Hamono got back to his feet, but the referee ruled that he hadn't sort of got back to his feet in time in the 10-second count. In boxing, if you're knocked to the ground, you're given 10 seconds to get back to your feet and show that you can carry on fighting. And by the referee's standard, he didn't feel that Hamono had done that in the 10 seconds. Hamono disagreed and believed he had, so instead they have now challenged the decision in the match, so that'll be going to the New Zealand Boxing Federation, I guess, and they will be trying to establish what went on and if there needs to be anything changed about that result, but we haven't heard anything about that just yet.
And what do you think the chances are of a rematch?
Possible, but Joe does have a fight later this year. Yeah.
Kia ora everyone, you're with Checkpoint with Sharon Brett Kelly on RNZ National on radio as always, but we're also screening live on Freeview Channel 50 and streaming live on the RNZ website. However you're doing so, thanks for joining us. Tonight, a Mexican immigrant who has called America home for more than 20 years tells us he's terrified at the prospect of Donald Trump becoming president. It comes after Mr. Trump formally accepted the Republican nomination in an hour-long speech in which he slammed immigrants and linked them to crime. An Auckland brewery apologises for using Māori names and imagery on its range of beers. And Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister Peter O'Neill survives a vote of no confidence despite calls for him to resign. But first, here's the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Donald Trump has accused Democratic rival Hillary Clinton of a legacy of death, destruction, terrorism and weakness as US Secretary of State in his acceptance speech for the Republican presidential nomination. Mr. Trump's speech of well over an hour was designed to set the tone for the general election campaign against Clinton, and he ran through a detailed list of her perceived failures as Secretary of State.
ISIS has spread across the region and the entire world. Libya is in ruins. Iraq is in chaos. Iran is on the path to nuclear weapons. Syria is engulfed in a civil war, and a refugee crisis now threatens the West.
Donald Trump says as president he would not sign the Pacific Free Trade Deal. Members of the Democratic Party's Liberal wing are now calling on Hillary Clinton to choose a running mate who also opposes the TPP and backs tough Wall Street reform. Convicted murderer and sex offender Philip John Smith is already planning to appeal his convictions today for escaping from prison, claiming a judge who deported him from Brazil was an alcoholic who suffered from dementia. Smith was today found guilty of 2 charges relating to his escape to South America while on temporary release from prison in 2014. He's been sentenced to 33 months imprisonment to be served with his existing life sentence. But his lawyer, Tony Ellis, says Smith may appeal the conviction based on further legal action being brought in Brazil.
If he wanted to, if there's sufficient evidence comes forward, he could challenge these convictions in that he shouldn't have been prosecuted for an offence that he'd been illegally deported for.
Tony Ellis says Smith could get compensation for being illegally detained and deported. The Foreign Minister, Murray McCully, says it's not helpful to jump to conclusions about Helen Clark finishing in the middle of the pack in an informal poll on the next United Nations Secretary-General. The 15 members of the UN Security Council held the vote on whether to encourage, discourage or have no opinion on each of the 12 declared candidates. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
Murray McCully says he spoke to officials in Helen Clark's campaign team in New York today. He says they're all working hard to get her over the line, but it's still early days. Some experts have accused the Old Boys Network being at work again after 4 of the 5 top candidates were men. The former Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Guterres, who was also the UN High Commissioner for Refugees for 10 years, came top in the informal poll. The final result is expected by October. From Parliament, May Heron.
2 women have been arrested over attempts to import methamphetamine totalling $7 million. Customs says it seized 11 packages of the drug at the border in the past 5 months, intended for different addresses in Hamilton and Invercargill. It says staff and police officers searched the properties this morning and the women were arrested. They appeared in court this afternoon charged with importing a Class A controlled drug. Sky Television is considering taking legal action against a group that illegally streamed a boxing match. The company says Sky caught more than 10 people illegally live streaming the fight between Joseph Parker and Australian Solomon Haumono last night. Its Director of Corporate Communications, Kirsty Way, says the company immediately cut the subscriptions of those caught so they could no longer share the feed illegally. She says the company is now considering taking legal action as a message needs to be sent.
By indicating that we do take it seriously and we will take action, I think that's the best thing that we can do. We're just trying to protect our investment and the investment that our partners have made in this content.
Kirsty Way from Sky Television. A Christchurch man has been discharged without conviction in the first prosecution in New Zealand of someone for flying a drone. In June, Simon Reeve was found guilty on 3 charges laid by the Civil Aviation Authority. Today, Judge Gary McCaskill ruled that Mr Reeve would have to pay $1,000 to a charity of his choice. Mr Reeve was found guilty of causing unnecessary endangerment and 2 charges of flying a drone in a controlled airspace without permission after taking footage of fire in Pine Beach near Christchurch. Judge McCaskill says the offending was at the lower end of the scale and he was not convinced he needed to use his case to deter other offenders. In sport, the Brumbies are confident they're ready to match wits with the Highlanders in tonight's Super Rugby quarter-final in Canberra as the visitors look to keep their title defence alive. The Highlanders are in a similar situation to last year when they came from 4th on the table to take the title, winning knockout games on the road, including the final. Hooker Ash Dixon says they can't draw too much from their playoff run last year.
What we did last year was pretty special, but last year's done. This year's a whole different ball game, obviously of travel and different teams and whatnot, that I think you've just got to take it as it comes and just roll with the punches, and like every team's different, you've got to prepare like you would for each different team, and I think we've just got to trust our prep and go out there and just play some footy.
The Highlanders finished 3rd in the overall standings this season, 9 points ahead of the Brumbies, though they have to travel for the quarter-final due to the conference playoff system. Captain Virat Kohli compiled an unbeaten century to put India in a commanding position on the first day of the opening test against West Indies in Antigua. Kohli was on 143 at stumps, his 12th test century, as the visitors reached 302 for 4. American basketball's NBA has cancelled plans to hold its 2017 All-Star Game in Charlotte, North Carolina, over a state law decried as discriminatory against the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community. That's the news.
I'm Nick Bollinger, and this week I'll be your guide for Music 101. I'll be talking to Andrew Cogan about his move to America and making his new album. We talk brand building with electro-pop artist Marla. And Esther reports in with a tour diary.
This is the first time I've ever been to Africa.
That's Music 101 with me, Nick Bollinger. Saturday at 2 here on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, and warnings are in force for severe gales and heavy rain in many areas. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Rain spreading south today, possibly heavy, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. Waitomo, Taumaranui and Taranaki, scattered rain, possibly heavy for a time overnight, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. Rain with heavy falls tomorrow night. Whanganui, Taihape and Manawatu, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, high cloud, scattered rain tomorrow morning. Kapiti, Wellington and Wairarapa, also Nelson and Marlborough. Cloudy areas today, occasional rain tomorrow morning, returning tomorrow evening, possibly heavy. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, scattered rain tomorrow. Pulla Westland and Fiordland, rain developing about Fiordland this evening and spreading north tomorrow with some heavy and possibly thundery falls. And the Chatham Islands, cloud increasing tomorrow with gale northerlies and rain from afternoon. It's coming up to 6:09, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Katrina. The Republican National Convention in Ohio has come to an end with the final speech from the party's presidential candidate, Donald Trump. Mr. Trump accepted the party's nomination to a loud cheer from the crowd.
Thank you very much. Friends, delegates, and fellow Americans, I humbly and gratefully accept your nomination for the presidency of the United States.
He then spoke for more than an hour, the longest acceptance speech in American history, canvassing his plans for the economy, crime, terrorism and immigration.
We are going to build a great border wall to stop illegal immigration, to stop the gangs and the violence, and to stop the drugs from pouring into our communities.
Donald Trump also vowed to suspend immigration from countries affected by terrorism and blamed decades of record immigration for lower wages and high unemployment. Rhetoric that terrifies Mexican immigrant Javier Vidana, who was brought to the United States from Mexico at 6 months old. He didn't realise he was illegal until he applied for university and didn't have the right papers. Mr. Vidana, who's 23, now has a working permit and a 1-year-old son with his wife, who's an American citizen. And he's working as a real estate agent. He told our reporter Alex Ashton a short time ago that when Donald Trump was speaking about immigration, he felt like a second-class citizen.
Like if we were some kind of animals, like we're being released on the streets and we're causing all this crime. And here I am, like I didn't ask to be an immigrant. I was brought here against my own will, and I'm working. I've never broken a law in my life. I'm helping my American citizen wife, my American citizen son, and I'm building a family here, and I'm paying my taxes, and like, what have I ever done wrong? And not only that, several peers of mine, I mean, they also got their papers that way. Like, that part was the part that stuck out to me the worst, because I think any country in this world, we have to understand that there is a need for immigration. We need other people's cultures. We need other people's intelligence in our society, and that's what makes us whole. And to be treated as almost if we were second-class citizens, almost we're like animals released on the street, that was really dehumanizing. Is the best word for me to describe it, and almost infuriated. And I wish I could go out there to New Zealand and move our whole family here, but I mean, we can't just uproot everything and leave our family here as well, you know what I'm saying?
And so with Trump now as the nominee, does that scare you hearing that kind of rhetoric put out in the arena by him?
I'm terrified. I'm absolutely 100% terrified. I know that I'm going to be okay because I have my wife here and my son now, and I'm going to figure out a way to survive. But I'm really terrified for that. There's a part of the society that I thought we were moving forward in America. I thought we were moving to a diverse country where we're accepting people of LGBT, Hispanics, African American, Muslim. I thought we were getting to that point, but Trump is making me realize that there's this part of America, there's actually a large amount of America that doesn't like the direction we're going and actually hates these people and has some kind of kind of disgust for it. And it terrifies me knowing that my son, who is Hispanic, obviously he was born here, but he's Hispanic, is going to have to be raised in this world if he does win, where differences of someone is not going to be accepted. White people are going to be considered superior in this country, and it's saddening, really. I'm 100% terrified, though, absolutely, without a doubt.
With Trump as a candidate and throughout his rise as a candidate, have you felt like attitudes towards Hispanics or people of other cultures has changed already?
Yes, I do. People in my life, being a real estate agent, a lot of real estate agents are, I don't know how it is in New Zealand, but here they're elder people above 40, primarily white. Even though Arizona is actually, I think last time I checked, and you can double check the numbers, I think 30-40% of Arizona is Hispanic. I don't remember the exact number, but there is a large percentage of Hispanics here.
Sure.
And the realtors are primarily white. And just seeing around the office how people are really getting on this Trump bandwagon, I can see, not necessarily towards me, but the way they talk about other people, maybe a Hispanic walking down the street, maybe a Hispanic cutting their yard, somebody with an accent, I can see already whereas people before were afraid to demonstrate that, I can start to see people making comments like, when Trump wins, we're going to get him out of this country, or like, I don't know. There's like more people in my everyday life that I'm starting to realize actually have this carrying in their heart this whole entire time. And now that this person's on the stage saying this, that they feel more compelled to say it.
And that's Javier Vidana talking to Alex Ashton. An Auckland brewery has apologised for using Māori names and imagery on its range of beers. Birkenhead Brewing Company has named beers after Te Arawa ancestors Tūtanakai and Hinimoa from Rotorua on 2 of its labels. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter Aaron Smale has more.
The company received a social media backlash against the usage of the names, including a death threat to staff, which is being investigated by police. Co-founder Steve Sims says the company meant no disrespect in using the images and had consulted with iwi in Auckland.
We're experienced business people. We look at these things very carefully before we develop any product. In this particular instance, we got it wrong. We got it wrong probably because the information that we needed to actually get was not centrally located, so it wasn't easy for us to actually find the correct answers. And so we acted on the advice that we'd got. We were clearly naive in that kind of branding exercise, and we've learned our lesson.
Mr. Sims says there needs to be a central place that people can go if they're interested in using Māori images.
We are imploring that there must be a central point where we can see how we can use this imagery or not, and I think it's quite fragmented at the moment.
But Māori Party co-leader Te Ururoa Flavel, who is Te Arawa, says the Intellectual Property Office has Māori advisors that businesses can talk to about using Māori content. He was told that the company had applied for a trademark, but there is a period where interested parties can object before the trademark is granted. Mr. Flavel says the product was launched before the period had lapsed.
Intellectual Property of New Zealand, whose job it is to look at those sorts of issues, in particular the ones that are raised around Māori content. Now, if we followed that process, that it shouldn't have been put on the shelves until such time as that sign-off had been approved by that body. Therefore, there must be some holes in legislation. We need to close them.
Mr. Flavel says it wouldn't have been hard to track down those associated with the Te Arawa ancestors, and it would have been a simple courtesy to ask.
Just good manners to ask those people who have a close association with that name or those names if it was appropriate or otherwise.
The company is now discussing the matter with the Te Arawa Kaumātua in Rotorua, but wouldn't say whether the company would be changing the names. For Checkpoint, ko Aaron Smale tēnei.
Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister Peter O'Neill has survived a vote of no confidence in the National Parliament today. Parliament sat for the vote amid heavy police presence in the capital, Port Moresby. RNZ International's Johnny Blades has been following the vote closely. I spoke to him a short time ago and asked him about the pressure on Mr O'Neill to resign.
Yeah, huge pressure over the last few months. There's been a fraud case which fraud detectives have wanted Peter O'Neill to come in for questioning over. It's related to alleged illegal state payments to a law firm. He's repeatedly refused and has challenged the validity of an arrest warrant that the fraud squad secured for him, and it's been padding around the court system for over 2 years now, in fact. But things really reached sort of critical mass a couple of months ago when the university students started protesting about it. Peaceful protests, but nonetheless police opened fire on them at in the capital early in June. And it was seen that the perception really was that the government had mishandled that, and the calls for O'Neill to stand aside have just ramped up since then. There's been civil disobedience from a number of key sectors, airline workers, health workers, maritime, energy. So the pressure really was building ahead of this vote of no confidence today.
And yet he won pretty convincingly, 85 votes to 21. Was that a surprise?
Not really, in a way, because during the week he had flown out a lot of the coalition MPs to sunny Alatau, where they had a kind of government boot camp, but it's understood that he sort of committed to the MPs who committed to him that he would pay their district funds, which had dried up quite a bit recently, but that they would be paid directly to them rather than district treasurers, which is quite controversial. But nonetheless, having sort of freed up some resources, he has been able to secure a very healthy majority in the 111-seat parliament. Today, 85 MPs voted to retain him as the Prime Minister, so that's until next year's general elections.
So the result of today's vote, does it mean that the public pressure on O'Neill will ease? I mean, I see one of the opposition MPs saying his days are numbered.
There's still deep discontent over Peter O'Neill. He really is increasingly unpopular with the public, who see him, for better or worse, as kind of responsible for much of the government corruption that exists in Papua New Guinea. And these groups that I mentioned who have been withdrawing their services in key sectors, they are saying that they will keep up the pressure until Peter O'Neill is gone. So I can't see the pressure subsiding just yet, but he is a very savvy leader, so he may well find a way to survive.
And in the meantime, I mean, there has been a lot of unrest in Papua New Guinea. Is that expected to continue?
Well, we hope not, because things can sometimes spiral into violence in Papua New Guinea, as we saw with the student protests last month. And when emotions are running high, there's even more of a chance. But the police presence in the capital today was, was huge, and they're sort of stepping up their presence in the major centres to try and keep things under control. The problem sometimes is that the police themselves are the ones who start opening fire unnecessarily, and then that just raises the stakes. So we'll just have to see what happens in the coming weeks and months.
Johnny Blades from Radio New Zealand International. An international tribunal at The Hague has found Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States were complicit in the 1965 mass killings in Indonesia. An estimated 500,000 people perished in what was one of the worst massacres of the 20th century. The killings were triggered by a failed coup that led to the deaths of 6 army generals. Assuming control of the country, General Suharto, the then head of the army, ordered the extermination of communist groups and sympathisers across the country. Suharto ruled as a dictator of Indonesia until 1998. In a non-binding ruling, the International People's Tribunal at The Hague has now ruled that Indonesia committed crimes against humanity. The Human Rights Watch Executive Director Kenneth Ross says the Indonesian massacres are still a very raw issue in the country.
The murder of at least 500,000 people in the course of just a few months is one of the most horrendous crimes of our era, and certainly of Indonesia's history. This is a crime of such a magnitude that it cannot be swept under the rug. Families remember, survivors remember, the descendants remember, and they are bearing a scar, a wound that they want addressed.
Dr. Damien Kingsbury is an Associate Professor in Political Studies at Deakin University in Australia and a long-time Indonesia watcher. He told our foreign editor Graham Acton the issue hangs over Indonesia as an historic atrocity, but still goes largely ignored elsewhere.
There's been no pressure from outside in the past. The United States has been very careful not to push Indonesia on this because it has regarded Indonesia as an important ally in the region and hasn't wanted to alienate the government. It does regard these events as an internal matter. And of course, the United States was in fact complicit in 1965, as was Australia and the United Kingdom, which were findings of this report, but which was otherwise quite well known.
In what way were they complicit?
Well, the United States was complicit through the CIA assisting and identifying individuals for targeting in the killings after the coup, or the attempted coup, depending on how you define it. Australia had a lesser role in that regard, but it was also one of the partners to the identification of people who should be targeted. Of course, the Indonesian military had their own lists. They didn't need that much external assistance, but there was a lot of support externally for this, and there was a lot of external justification for the coup and for the subsequent events. The Australian government, the Australian Prime Minister at the time, Harold Holt, was very supportive of the coup, describing the deaths of at least 500,000 people as a quote-unquote reorientation, political reorientation. So there was clearly an awareness on the part of Australia at that time, and the United States and the UK, but, if you like, from an apologetic or a supporting position.
How was the event presented to the Australian people and, in fact, to the New Zealand people?
It was presented, as I said, as a quote-unquote a political reorientation. You've got to keep in mind that this was at the height of the Cold War, that events in Vietnam were just ramping up, and the United States in particular was very concerned to crush communism in Southeast Asia, as was Australia, I think as was New Zealand at that time. So there was a sense that this was a step in that broader process. But of course the unleashing of the forces in Indonesia at that time were horrific, and the people who were murdered, otherwise arrested, tortured, disappeared, imprisoned, and all the rest of it vastly exceeded anybody's expectations at that time, and probably vastly exceeded anything like what might have been necessary in order to quell what was argued to have been the communist threat. Now, that raises another point, of course, which is what was the communist threat, and it certainly wasn't a military one. It was a political one, and it was a relatively moderate one by global standards. Communism was made illegal subsequent to the events of 1965, and any reference to communism was forbidden. Certainly anything that was a political organisation that had anything vaguely resembling communist leanings was illegal or banned. It was illegal to talk about communism. Any literature was banned from being available. So it was simply wiped from the history books entirely. It simply disappeared. And that state of affairs continued up until after the fall of Suharto in 1998. President Suharto came to power on the back of those events. And even now, it's still a taboo word, a taboo subject. So whilst one can, or some people are now saying we need to address this issue and we need to go back and look at the events, explicit support for communism is still illegal and is still regarded as a very strong negative within Indonesian political society.
How do you think this report will be reviewed today in Jakarta?
The Indonesian government, the President Joko Widodo, has already rejected it and said that they don't accept it, that the tribunal has no legitimacy and that they are not going to act on it.
That's Dr. Damien Kingsbury from Deakin University in Melbourne speaking to our foreign editor Graham Acton. Finally tonight, the BBC's John Sopel looks back on the Trump campaign and the candidate who has become a political phenomenon.
He's the billionaire businessman who wants to be a political leader without being a politician. He's also been the host of a reality TV show where his fame derives from saying, "You're fired," but who could soon be hired by the American people to be their 45th president.
I'm Donald Trump, and I'm always on the lookout for talented people.
And the fact that he's not a politician is what marks him out from Hillary Clinton, says Roger Stone, Trump's closest advisor for many years.
I think in her case they see someone who is mouthing words written by others that have been polled and focus grouped and round-tabled, and they're stale and they're phony. You can tell they're not coming from her. In Donald Trump, they see a guy who is unscripted, who is unprogrammed, who is working without a net, who is speaking from the heart. And it's interesting, it's authentic.
And who else but Donald Trump would go to Scotland, as he did last month, to promote his golfing business when he's meant to be running for president? For him, there's no distinction. It's all part of the Trump brand.
This isn't what you would call orthodox political campaigning. A whole bunch of journalists on the back of vehicles that are normally meant to carry sand and peat going across a golf course in Aberdeen. But then there's nothing very predictable about Donald Trump.
And that applies to policy too. No thick research documents, but no one's in any doubt what he thinks. It's provocative, sometimes divisive, and invariably challenging the status quo.
I'm going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it, right? Right? It will be American workers who are hired to do the job. Nobody else.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
What's striking about Donald Trump's policies are that they are simple, catchy and memorable, and no one has the faintest idea how any of them are going to be implemented. But here's the thing, it doesn't seem to matter, because people trust him to make America great again.
And the moment of truth has arrived.
So where does this leave the race? One by one, Donald Trump has seen off all his rivals, and now only Hillary Clinton stands in his way. All of which begs a simple question, which I put to the country's leading Republican pollster. Can Donald Trump be the next president of the United States of America?
I have no doubt that Donald Trump could be the next president. No doubt at all. But it's as much to do with what he does over the next 110 days as it is what she does over that same period. If the election is about Donald Trump, he's going to lose. If the election is about Hillary Clinton and what they think of her, he wins.
And that's the leading Republican pollster Frank Luntz ending that report from the BBC's John Sopel. And that's Checkpoint for this evening. Thanks for joining us on your radio, your television, online or however you chose to connect with us today. You can hear highlights in late edition at 10:15 this evening, or any of our stories tonight on rnz.co.nz/checkpoint. And for all the latest news, information, feature stories from New Zealand and around the world, go to the rnz.co.nz homepage. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly from me and the Checkpoint team. Have a great weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Donald Trump has formally accepted the Republican Party's nomination as its presidential candidate, delivering a strong message to delegates on law and order, immigration and the economy. The murderer and child sex offender Philip John Smith intends to appeal against his convictions today for escaping from prison, claiming a judge who deported him from Brazil was an alcoholic who has dementia. And an unofficial United Nations poll puts Helen Clark in 6th place for the top UN job. Our next news and weather is at 7. It's 6:30 and this is Trending Now, our feature highlighting the stories you've been sharing via digital and social media. A popular piece of audio to listen to again this week has come from the archives. Here's Jessie Mulligan.
New Zealand athletes are